I decided to look at Chris Herren. So identifying data. Chris Herren is a 31-year-old Caucasian male. Chris finished college and is now playing basketball professionally. Chris grew up in Fall River, Massachusetts. Following an impressive high school career at Durfee, Chris Herren decided to stay in state and signed with Boston College. Due to a broken wrist and 3 failed drug tests thereafter, Herren took a second chance at pursuing college basketball at Fresno State in California. Herren, following 3 years at Fresno State, ended up being selected as the 33rd overall pick in the 1999 draft to the Denver Nuggets. He played 3 seasons in the NBA, finishing up with the Boston Celtics. Chris then spent 5 years abroad playing in Europe and Asia. The presenting concern in the case with Chris Herren is his continued drug abuse. Chris has a total of 7 felonies and 4 overdoses on his record. In high school, Chris drank and smoked pot after games. In college, his drug use progressed to cocaine. Following a broken wrist in his first season at Boston College, Chris turned to drugs. He proceeded to fail 2 more drug tests and was kicked off the team. With all the hype behind his arrival at Boston College, all of his fans dubbed Chris a failure and a druggie. His face was stamped over all the local newspapers with cocaine splashed across it. For a short period of time, on his arrival to Fresno State in California, Chris was clean. However, come his junior year, he talks about doing lines before he walked into his arena for big games. Chris's addiction did not stop when he got to the NBA. During his time in the NBA, Chris was introduced to Oxycontin and immediately got hooked. When Chris was traded from the Boston Celtics and moved to Bologna, Italy, he brought his Oxycontin with him. However, when his supply ran out, he turned to a new drug, heroin. Chris describes that out of the $22,000 he was making a month, he spent roughly $12,000 of that on drugs. At the end of his battle with drug use, Chris turned to crystal meth. The biggest stakeholder in the case of Chris Herren was his family. Chris, in his interviews, talks about how he used to lie to his wife about where he was going. He also mentions that he used to spend over half of his family's monthly income on drugs. Chris was rarely home to act as a father to his 2 children and was often high and drunk when he was around them. Chris discusses how he used to pawn off his kids' toys for money to buy drugs and alcohol. Out of his 3 children, Chris only saw the birth of one of them, and even after witnessing the birth, he went down to his dealer's car and shot up. Following his return to the hospital, Chris's wife told him, "Don't ever come back." In the rehab that he soon joined, Herren's counselor handed him the phone and told him to call his house and tell his wife to tell his kids that he died in a car crash because he didn't really deserve a family. This shocking fact was one of the realizations to Chris that he needed to change his actions. In the small town of Fall River, Massachusetts, Chris, following his large amounts of basketball success, became a local celebrity. Chris held the weight of the city on his back. Due to his high prowess within the community, the boys on the basketball team used to go out after games and drink and smoke marijuana. But everyone in the town turned a blind eye because the boys were winning. His coach failed to act as a positive mentor, which Bloom explains is always a necessary aspect in a coach-athlete relationship. Chris's high school coach never held Chris accountable for his actions, which maybe can be attributed to his eventual downfall. Due to his celebrity status at Boston College, Chris was soon offered harder drugs by other students, like cocaine. This only fueled his disease. Chris used cocaine throughout his college career at Fresno State and throughout his time playing for the Boston Celtics. During his time at the Boston Celtics, Chris would travel back to Fall River, where one day his friends introduced him to a new prescription drug called Oxycontin. Chris describes Oxycontin as the $20 yellow pill at a barbecue that turned into a $20,000 per month habit. Rock bottom may have come for Chris when right before a game for the Celtics, he stood on the street corner outside the Fleet Center, dressed in his warm-up uniform, waiting for a dealer, because he felt that he couldn't play without his drugs. Herren then went to play abroad, where he was introduced to heroin. In 2008, Chris Herren was found having crashed his car in a ditch, having overdosed. When he came to, the paramedic told him that he had died. Strengths. Chris is an extremely gifted athlete. Chris is also extremely resilient. Throughout the many trials and tribulations Chris went through and his continuous struggles with drug abuse, he somehow found a way to keep playing basketball. Chris acted as an incredibly strong person to eventually realize that his disease was hurting those around him and that he needed to make a strong attempt to sober himself up. So looking at this case, I decided that I would probably treat Chris with two different therapies. First is the Gestalt theory, and second is the solution-focused-based therapy. Individuals have the ability to self-regulate, and we have a choice to act or not to act. Quite like his counselor in his rehab facility, I would give Chris the ultimatum that he can continue his drug binge and lose his family forever, or he can pick himself up, get clean, and be the husband and father that he should be. I would explain to him that you have to focus on the here and now. The wrongs he has done are in the past, and what he will do in the future is unknown, so he has to take one day at a time to improve himself. Study the key to Gestalt therapy is growth as an individual. While working with Chris, I would be empathetic towards his state, and I would also be completely non-judgmental on the path that he has previously led. I think it is necessary within this case that as a counselor you acted as an interpreter and try and help Chris first figure out what his problems are and then help him create actions that will help him to overcome them. Rather than just have a counselor tell him what to do, I think Gestalt's humanistic aspects will be the most beneficial to helping Chris stay sober for the longest period of time. Because I think if he makes the changes for himself, he is more likely to follow them in the future. Counseling I would use would be the solution-focused brief therapy. As Hogard explains, the main focus in solution-focused counseling is on finding solutions to a problem and empowering the athlete, instead of spending time and effort on finding the possible causes of the problem. I think this is extremely important in helping improve Chris's life. He needs to think about the positive goals that come with being sober, rather than the negative ones of just trying to kick his addiction. While using this solution-focused brief therapy, I would encourage Chris to explore how his realities about drug use are being constructed, and then ask him to reflect on how these constructions are affecting his daily activities. I would explain to Chris that he is only a drug addict if he labels himself as such, and it is necessary for him to stop identifying himself in that way. Once again, like the Gestalt theory, it is the client, not the psychologist, that is the expert. I think this is very important in Chris's case. I would try to get Chris to realize that he is not the drug addict that the media has portrayed him to be. He is much more than that. He is a father, a husband, a friend, and a son. I would tell them that because he is so much more than his current image of himself, it is necessary to create solutions to help improve himself and therefore his life. Like Gestalt therapy, I would tell Chris to forget about his troubled past and focus on the now and future, and doing whatever he can to make those a better place for him and his family. Thank you.